This is Queen Victoria's grandmother. That's a factual picture painted by Gainsborough. How would you describe her?
She looks of mixed race.
Correct. This is Queen Victoria's grandmother, a woman who was of colour.
Jak Beula, an amazing man. As a model, he was the face of Interflora. As a musician, he worked with top names such as Jazzy B. He was once even the agent for Hollywood legend Betty Davis. But that's not why he's amazing. He has probably done more than anyone else to highlight black history in Britain. His top-selling board game, Nubian Jak, spawned an organisation of the same name, educating young people, producing books, and putting up blue plaques celebrating important black and ethnic minority Britons. I joined him for coffee one morning and started by asking how the board game, the thing he is most famous for, came about.
Right, Ben, my background is social work. While working as a social worker, I began to work with lots of inner-city children, both black and white. And this was in the early 90s. And a lot of them had negative imagery of themselves, negative self-imagery, negative media stereotypes. And I thought, well, why don't I try and redress that by making a game that will give them a sense of identity, a sense of positivity, and highlight the positive contributions made to Britain, particularly by black folk. And I called the concept Union Black. I couldn't get the name Ben Union Black because there's a board game called Union from the 1950s which still owned the trademark Union. So I thought, well, if I can't call it Union Black, I'll call it Nubian Jak.
It's been really popular, hasn't it? It outsold all the other board games in Hamleys or somewhere, didn't it, at one point?
Yes, and in the early days of its, when it was first launched, it did outsold Trivial Pursuit and Monopoly together, which created the phenomenon of, or at least the beginning of the phenomenon, which is Nubian Jak. So, unfortunately, it hasn't continued to do such impressive sales, or I wouldn't be sitting with you, Ben. I'd be sitting with Time magazine reporter. But unfortunately, I'm talking to you, which means its sales have slowed down slightly. But the thing is, it's mutated into a far more organic, far more dynamic, far more phenomenal concept, which of course includes books, board games, educational academy, and of course a heritage plaque scheme.
Bringing us on there to the heritage plaque scheme, how did this project come about? Because the blue plaques, we know English Heritage do loads of blue plaques. Mm-hmm. When did you decide that, hang on, there's not enough plaques celebrating black people? How did that project come about?
That's a good question. Actually, that wasn't my plan to redress that particular balance. I was happy doing Nubian Jak and the book. I was invited by English Heritage in 2004 to highlight, or at least bring more attention to, their BME plaque scheme, as they call it. Nubian Jak was asked to present a treasure trail which would get young people involved, schools participating. We did that with the launch of an 8th English Heritage BME plaque called the CLR James plaque in Brixton, no less, and that was a fabulous success. The following month after that launch, I said, why don't we do a plaque to Bob Marley? And it transpired that there was a lot of bureaucracy into producing plaques, and it wasn't as simple as highlighting, someone as obvious as Bob Marley. And so the following year, I decided to do it myself, and it became the largest or most famous blue plaque in Britain. In fact, it became the subject of a BBC documentary.
And how do you go about getting a blue plaque put up on a building? You have to ask the permission of the owners of the building? Or?
You do. You have to, first of all, get a consensus that person requested, because you don't put up blue plaques. People request. I have a panel, and we get requests all the time, and we take it to the panel and we decide, is that person worthy, or they're all worthy, but is that person deemed more appropriate at this particular time? Once we've agreed that, then we apply to the owner of the building and we seek planning permission. In the case of like the plaque on the Foreign Office, for instance, we need to get consent not only from the Foreign Office but from English Heritage, who own listed buildings all around the country, I'm sure you know.
And that's quite a significant one, isn't it, the blue plaque on the Foreign Office? Tell us why there's a blue plaque there.
Actually, Ben, it's not a blue plaque, it's a stone plaque, because as a listed building, we could not put up a plaque which contravened the architectural structure of the existing infrastructure. So the plaque there is a stone plaque, and it's to a man called Ignatius Sancho, who was a phenomenal man, an absolutely amazing achiever in the 18th century. He was the only black man to vote in general elections, and the reason why he was able to do that was because he was a property owner, a shop owner, and of course he was a free man as well. So, and if you understand the 18th century, there's a lot of white working class people who were in workhouses and very poor, and having a pretty hard time, frankly. So for a brother to be able to enter the foray of local elections was some achievement. But to conclude, he was also an author, he was a composer, he was obviously a shop owner, and the man who helped to, or at least contributed to the abolition of the slave trade in Britain.
The next blue plaque that's going up is to celebrate John Archer, who was the first black mayor in Britain.
That's correct. Well, he's the first black mayor in London. There was, for many a year, it was thought that he was Britain's first black mayor, but there's a man called Alan Mims who's now been found to be a mayor in 1904 in Norfolk, of all places. John Archer became the mayor of Battersea in 1913, and he was an absolutely amazing man. He was a far more dynamic man, it would appear, than Alan Mims. At least a lot more is known about John Archer, and it's a total honour to be involved in honouring him with a blue plaque.
As you mentioned earlier, you've been a musician, a social worker, entrepreneur, songwriter, model, all kind of things. What's the future for Jak Beula?
It's again all to do with the karmic order. However long I have, I would like to make a contribution to humanity, and that's not a soundbite. That's what I like to do. And we're going to end by the question, why is Nubian Jak not better known? Because it's obviously on the radar of somebody. Why is it if I was to go out and shoot somebody tomorrow, I would be front page news? But the fact that I've had a board game that has outsold two of the most popular board games in history, a book that I went to America, I couldn't get a publishing deal over in the UK. Interesting question. I had to go to America, HarperCollins, and get a book deal with the largest publishers on the planet, HarperCollins. Why is it that this company has got plaques which are going up all over the country? I'm doing a plaque to Michael Jackson next year. That will change probably the concept of blue plaques and take it to another level. Why is Nubian Jak not better known, Ben?